Okay guys, I promised you more PTR content. This time I'm going to get into one of the builds that I think is going to become part of the meta. I think for some players, not the entire army, I think for the higher skilled and more DPS focused players, I think the Bruiser class is going to get a slight shift. I think that the Greatsword is going to take over for maybe, if there's 20 Great Axes in a war roster, I think maybe 5 to 10 of them will get replaced with the Greatsword. I think it's going to be the more high skill cap players because it's more difficult to work with. The combos are a little bit more difficult to land, but it's so versatile and it can offer so much utility. And the amount of CC and debuff that it has, or the amount of debuff that it has, is just astronomical. It doesn't really have any CC, but the debuffs that it has are just insane. Most versatile weapon in the game by far. Also, like hands down, the most burst damage in the game. And metas change. They want the devs want them to. It helps increase the gear grind. So everybody's going to have to get more gear for the Greatsword, and when it comes more into meta, we're going to see different classes, I guess you would call them. But what I think is going to be a huge part of this is Greatsword Warhammer. In medium, I don't think you'll see it as much in heavy. I think maybe like the heavy point sitter, if there's like a handful of those guys in the war, I think this would be huge for them. But I think for the bursty DPS clump building, Greatsword is huge. Especially if you pair it with a Great Axe Warhammer. So like one Bruiser runs Great Axe Warhammer, one Bruiser runs Greatsword Warhammer, and then you have the rest of your normal team comp. But if you pair those two together, it's unending clump. It's insane. And I'll go over exactly why in just a second. So let's start off with the Warhammer. Either Armor Breaker or Wrecking Ball. I see a lot of people taking Armor Breaker now, so I'm going to go with that. And then I'm going to do Shockwave, Path of Destiny, and I want to get down to here. But I also want this, because I do a lot of heavies. This. That guy. We are going to want this one. This one. That's your build for Warhammer. So Prevailing Spirit, you want, because it heals 35% of damage whenever you use either one of those. That's huge for sustain. Deal 15% increased damage against targets affected by a Warhammer debuff. That's any. Acceleration is good. Reduce Warhammer cooldowns by 7% when using light attacks against targets with active debuff. It's not really super useful, but the other option is a haste, or reduce damage taken while sprinting, so you don't really need that. Or reduce that. I guess you could kind of get rid of that and go into get the haste, which in my opinion, would be more valuable than this, because I never light attack with my Warhammer. So let's move on to the... Oh, I need some Azoth. Okay, so now let's do Greatsword. If you're going for burst, here's what I'm going to say is the best. Crosscut is huge. It's by far the most significant single, like the highest damage single ability in the game. If you're going into tanking, you're going to go in a little bit different of a direction. Every single ability from this onslaught tree is massive, but for clumps, you need to take Roaring Rupture. So I'll go through that first. You're going to want Perfect Vigilance. If you're hit while at full health, reduce damage taken by 20%, then gain a 20% Fortify. So on impact, huge. If you have your Greatsword out on impact, you have a huge Fortify off the rip. Then you're going to want to go... I take this because I don't block. So blocking causes you to go into Defiant stance, but you can. But here's the thing. You don't want to be in Defiant stance when you do this ability, because it's a push. So don't even take this. You don't want any risk of going into Defiant stance unless you want to. So what this does is Roaring Rupture, stab the ground and send out a Shockwave with 4 meter radius that deals 120% weapon damage. Decent damage. It's a 4 meter radius, so you could do pretty good damage to a clump. You can also get an 8% Fortify for 5 seconds for every person hit, max 3 stacks. So that's a 24%. If you're in a clump, that's a guaranteed 24% Fortify. If you're doing that right after impact, that's 44% Fortify. If you're in a Sacred, you're at fort cap with just one ability. It's insane. And you enter Defiant stance when this ends, which is huge for another reason. Purifying Roar cleanses 2 debuffs after using Roaring Rupture. So when you use Roaring Rupture, drop 2 debuffs. The Intimidating Roar is huge. Shockwave applies. Anybody hit with it gets 10% weakened for 10 seconds on hit. It's massive. It's bonkers. That's way too long. 5, I could see it being dropped down to 5 before live happens. But 10 seconds on a weekend is insane, especially when you're talking about any kind of prolonged clump fight. And it gives you uninterruptible for 5 seconds. That one perk is massive. Then you have moving on to Adaptive Rupture. This is where the clump building starts. In Onslaught stance, Shockwave pulls foes 3 meters towards you. So everybody you hit gets pulled 3 meters towards you. Even if they're at the end, they're only 1 meter away from you. So if you're already in Onslaught stance, which you will be if you do the combo right, everybody you hit with this, if you're in the middle of a clump, gets pulled in. And you enter a Defiant stance, which reduces the damage taken by 15%, reduces outgoing damage by 15%. Who cares? But here's the big thing. Guard point. When blocking incoming attacks you could block incoming attacks while charging a heavy attack. So what this does is it gives you a shield in front of you while you do a heavy. And that is super important, especially if you pair it with this, or where is it? This. Reduce stamina damage by 50% when blocking attacks just after raising your guard or with guard point. So that works with the guard with your heavy attack. It also inflicts a 5% rend for 10 seconds against melee attackers who attack you. So, and it stacks up to 3 times. So that's a 15% rend for 10 seconds. So I'm going to grab that. Now we have 12 points to dedicate here. That is going to go into Heavy Blade, because we're going to be doing a lot of heavies. We're going to want Keen Posture. This is a must-have. This Relentless Rush, and I'll go into it more later. We're going to want Aggressive Shift. We're going to go all the way down here. You don't need this. You don't need this at all. So in Onslaught stance, Relentless Rush applies a root. So you're going to want to open with a heavy. So you get into combat, you open with a heavy, you Relentless Rush in, and then you Roaring Rupture. Everybody gets pulled to you. And that's when you just start messing people up. And then your next other option is up to you. If you're looking to maximize damage output and you have a high skill and good timing, go crosscut all day because they're going to blow people up. If you want to provide a lot of utility and still do decent damage and do a little bit more CC, so like if you're going more for point presence and tank, I would definitely pick this up. If you're going for just burst damage, pick up crosscut. So I think most people will benefit the most, especially for the army as a whole. And here's why. Because the first attack applies disease, which reduces healing by 20% for 10 seconds. The follow-up attack strikes all foes within 3 meters. If you take this, you add a follow-up attack that deals 140% weapon damage by activating the skill again or using a light attack. So that, in total, is a 220 weapon damage attack. That applies 2 stacks of Rend for 10 seconds, that are 5, so that's 10% Rend for 10 seconds. If you're already an Onslaught, which you will be, you're going to add an additional Rend, so that's 3. So it's 15% Rend on top of the Rend that they get from, what is it? From this. So, which is another 15% Rend. So that's 15% Rend, that's 30% Rend. They're almost at Rend cap. And you have 3 more abilities to pick from. So I'm going to go from Step and Strike. After dodging, gain 10% in power for the next 3 hits within 10 seconds. Attacks empowered by this effect restore 10 stamina. Huge ability. This is amazing. Hitting foes reduces all Greatsword cooldowns by 2%. That's why you don't need this, because you're very rarely going to get a kill with your Relentless Rush. It does decent damage. It's 120 weapon damage, which is the same as this, but it's kind of unwieldy. So you don't really need to take this because you get this. Charged heavies are going to reduce it by 10% as is. Now, this is kind of up for debate. I would say getting the critical hit chance increased by 10% when attacking foes with a debuff over the become energized by landing a critical hit and regain 5 stamina and 5% base health for 5 seconds. Or per second for 5 seconds. Because it has a 10-second cooldown. And 25% regen over 5 seconds isn't that huge. I mean, it may seem like a lot, but a nullifying Oblivion is going to strip that away immediately. The stamina is nice. But that is going to get, you're going to get crushed with that. That's just going to be always stripped away. This is okay because that first hit's going to do a lot of damage. But honestly, I would say this would even be better so that you could move around. But that, again, that haste is going to get stripped away by nullifying. So you could either choose this, or you could go into something like after gaining Defiant Stance, the next damage taken within 5 seconds is reduced by 25%. Or this is good because of this. It procs off of, so whenever you're blocking, it enables blocking ranged attacks with a Greatsword, but increases stamina damage from blocking any attack by 10%. But your guard point works and synergizes with this very well. So if you're doing a heavy attack and you get hit with a fireball, it's blocked. If somebody hits you with an orb and you're heavy attacking, it's blocked. Arrows, everything, any ranged attack, it's just going to block it. It's like holding up a shield. It's insane. So that's good, but I save that for tanks. You're going to want the critical hit percent chance. So if you look at the way that this is structured, and if I go back to my hotbar, I'll go over it. So you have an AoE CC, an AoE DPS, and stagger. You have armor reduction, and then you have a massive pull. You have Relentless Rush, which is a very good movement ability that if you do the weapon perk on your sword, it breaks you out of roots, CCs, everything. It's like a cleanse. And then you have Skyward Slash, which is a huge stagger. Applies 3 stacks of Rend, and if you're an Onslaught stance, and it plagues them. So it's an you're just an AoE DPS monster that can also make clumps. Now, if you wanted to go the tanky, so that's one way to be like DPS. I think this is going to be the most universal build. For DPS, if you're in light or medium and your main job is just to lay down the hammer and do as much damage as possible, it's Unstoppable Cuts. Because this isn't affected by anything. So, except for an Onslaught stance, the threshold's increased to 75%. That's great to do the bonus damage. But if you're using this to execute people, they're going to be below 50% life. You're going to use this after all of the rest of your abilities. So, similar setup here. Go down this tree, get these guys. You need this because this puts you into onslaught stance to begin with. Pull that. And then for the DPS tree, I would still take Roaring Rupture. Because the pull on this, the fortification, it has grit. Like, it's just the weaken, everything about this skill is just amazing. So this also gives you 2 extra points. So what I would do is, after gaining Defiant Stance, the next damage taken within 5 seconds is reduced by 25%. So that's going to save you from a lot of burst. And then this as well. So you could either do this and after that, or the arrows. That's kind of up to you. But I would do this. This is okay because it could go up to 12% bonus damage, but getting the buffs come and go so fast that you're usually going to be sitting at around 3% bonus damage, 3 to 6. So, and that's when you're using the Great Axe as your primary. But for burst damage, I would say this is the way to go all day. If you're in a war, you need to take Roaring Rupture. It's a must-have on the Great Axe for sure. So this build can work in light. This build, I mean, if you're going light, I would probably go full onslaught tree, or replace this with the pull, because the steadfast strike is good for like healer killer builds. But for sure, I would say if you're in a medium build and you just want to do a bunch of burst damage, this is going to be the build that you want. Now let's look at weapons. So for weapon perks, I'm going to go in here and check the auction house. And this is specifically for wars. This build is specifically for wars. So for weapon perks, your Warhammer, you want Sundering Shockwave. Sorry. Hold on a second. Sundering Shockwave is huge. I'll just go to a weapon. So here we go. Sundering Shockwave. It gets better after it's 600, but Inflicts a Rend, reduces target's damage absorption by 14% for 10 seconds, so it's another source of Rend. It's huge. It's a must-have on any Warhammer, especially for wars. So this with Trenchant Strikes is super good. There's all kinds of perks that you want to get with it, but that's a must-have on the Warhammer. But here's the perk that is going to be huge for Greatsword. It's called Relentless Freedom. Now, if I go here, Relentless Freedom. So, let's look at this. Relentless Freedom at 600. Activating Relentless Rush removes roots and slows. Also increases Relentless Rush's crit chance by 19%. So the second you pop Relentless Rush, you're out of a root. You're not slowed anymore. The only thing it doesn't get rid of is stuns. It won't break stuns, but ice walls, screams, gravity wells, everything. You're out. You're moving. And if you look at it, and the crit chance is nice, but it's not super needed. If you look at that ability, look at the movement on it. It's just like Whirlwind. It's essentially just Whirlwind, but it only attacks twice. And you're leaping forward. So I'll do that combo again. Sorry about my cat. My cat wants pets. Little head pets. So this into Shockwave, boom, everybody's pulled. If you could do heavy attack, then get into it. So if you're slowed, you just Relentless Rush out of the slow. Then you're already in. Nobody's gonna get the root unless you're heavy attack first. So that's why this is so good for sustained clump fights, because you could get a heavy attack off. You're putting bleed, you're putting rend just with your heavy attack. You're debuffing the shit out of people, and you have a block. So the combo would look like this: Relentless Rush, pull, heavy back into that, and while you're doing that heavy, you're blocking. Because and if you have the blocking arrows, and you're blocking orbs, you're blocking everything. So I'll show you again what the block looks like. So if I just do this, and then I block, see that blue? That's me holding up a shield while I'm charging up a heavy attack. If I hit with that heavy attack, it puts me into onslaught, and then you could go into crosscut, like nuke people. But what I would recommend doing is I'll show you my preferred build, which doesn't include crosscut. I'll go back to this and show you that build. So yeah, it's going to add bleed to your unflinching blade because you grit and causes bleeding. So if you're in Dex, you need this because you'll have grit on your heavies. So let's look at the combo here. If you do whirlwind in, pull, switch, dagger, armor breaker to finish, or to rend, add more rend. That combo alone, if they're getting away, path of destiny. You could even open with a path of destiny to stagger. If you're going into a clump fight that's already existing, one thing a lot of people do is they'll path of destiny in, and then they'll go in. So you would be able to get in there really quickly. So you just, if you're going into a clump, path of destiny in, switch, boom, pull, dagger, shockwave, boom. Like if you have a gravity well, if you did that into a gravity well, everybody in that gravity well's dead. Just because of how much damage this weapon does. If you look at the base damage of this weapon, it's 1448 or 1486. That's huge. It has a 3% crit chance. Crit damage modifier is kind of low at 1.25. But the blocking stam damage in that is better than, I think it's better than the great, yeah. So it's about the same as the Warhammer, except you get a lot more out of it because the block is better and you block on heavies. And I'll go into my attributes now. So the crit chance is going to be super high because you're going to want to go. You have two options really here. You could go into 200 con and drop the 50 dex and just go straight into strength. But I've tested this out. You still have a lot of survivability because you have so much fortification that you don't really need the 10% physical on elemental because you're always going to be at fortify cap. Especially if you're in a sacred ground, you're getting healed by an AoE healer. You have Shirking Fortification. You're going to be at and well above fortify cap, to where if anybody applies any type of rends to you, you're not going to feel it. You're going to be at fortify cap basically indefinitely throughout the whole course of the war, unless you're just running from point to point. So you want the grit from strength. You want all of the bonuses because you're going to get the 10%. To physical attacks, 5% to slashing and strike damage. You're using both of those. Plus 25 stamina damage from weapons, melee weapon light attacks. 10% damage on stunned, slow to rooted enemies, which is everybody you hit. Stamina regen is faster while performing base attacks with the melee weapon. You're always going to be heavy attacking. The light attack combo with the Greatsword is pretty quick too, but you might as well just heavy. And here's one of the reasons why. So if you look at the Greatsword, the first and second light attacks deal 90% damage. Third light attack does 130. Charged heavy attack 1 and 2 deals 150. Fully charged heavy attack does 170% slash damage. That's the same as a Warhammer. That's 10% more than your Great Axe. That's a lot more than every other weapon except for maybe hatchet. Spear's pretty good for heavies too. It's 165. It's the second to these guys. But it's 170. It's the same heavy charged heavy as 170. It's the same as a Warhammer. So you're gonna get those like Warhammer style heavies off on people, and you're just gonna destroy them. Yeah, it's gonna be insane. It's like the Great Axe on steroids, but you have to get in there first. So I think this is going to be paired well with other Great Axe players. So Great Axe, like Standard Bruiser, Great Axe Warhammer, plus this pairing well, are going to pair so well together, it's insane. Another combo I can see working out, and that I'm probably going to primary, is the Greatsword Blunderbuss. It is the highest burst damage combo in the game, without question. It melts everything. You can play it light, medium, or heavy, kind of the same way that you can do this. Hey guys, I'm going to pause this right here and apologize for not adding in the tank build, and for my cat meowing. I will make a video specifically for that because I think that point sitters are going to be a little bit more common, at least 2 to 3 of them in a war, just because of this build alone. And I'm going to go over the importance of them, what I think it's going to do to the meta, and how effective these can be, and I'm going to devote an entire shorter video to it. And I'm going to go, in that video, I'm going to go over the Blunderbuss Greatsword build and the Greatsword Warhammer point sitter build, and I think you'll find both of those pretty huge. Yeah, so keep on the lookout for that video. I'll get back to this one. For this build, I would suggest medium or heavy. Light is for healer, or is for like healer killers. And I'd probably pair it more with something like Sword Shield and Greatsword, which is another video. But for like the Bruiser replacement, this is hands down what I would pick. Just because of the versatility, the AoE damage, everything the burst, everything's huge. It's just all around. It's as good as a Greatsword, but with more damage. Will it replace Greatsword? No, because you still need that ranged gravity well. You need that to function as an army, because otherwise clumps just won't form. But since follow-up gravity wells aren't as effective, so like back-to-back gravity well isn't as effective. So this pull is going to be way bigger. It's going to give you Fortify, and you're just going to be you're going to gravity well, everybody's going to try to get out, you're going to get in there, you're going to pull everybody back in, and then you're just going to murder everything. So you're going to follow in with your Relentless Rush behind you see a grav go out, you Relentless Rush in there, you pull them back in, you Shockwave, you get your combo off, everybody dies. It's going to be insane. I hope you like this video. I'm super stoked for this build. I think it's going to change the face of wars dramatically, and if your army doesn't adjust to this meta unless they change it, I think this build's going to wreck people. If you want to drop Skyward Slash, you're going to be losing another stagger, a lot of Rend, and a disease, but you're going to get dead bodies. This thing is just insanely high damage. But I would save the DPS to the DPS. Your job is to get in there, do as much disruption and damage as possible in a single short bursty period of time. And the amount of time that this crosscut takes to finish is just way too long. High skill gap players, go for it. Have fun. The majority of the army, this setup right here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so I can buy myself some chicken nuggies. Hope you guys like it. Thanks and have a wonderful day. Later.